welcome to Winterviews, Series 1, Episode 4. I am your host, Catherine Silva. I go by Cat for short, and I am a dark fiction author from Maine. On today's episode, we are speaking with fellow author Kristi Petersen Schoonover about character-driven horror. How are you doing today, Kristi?
I am doing great, actually. Really
Wonderful, wonderful, good. Good. How is the weather in your neck of the woods?
It is not good right now. Although I will say it's warm for February, which is nice. It was warm yesterday too. We did have some fog, very rainy, but it feels more like a late March kind of a day.
Yeah.
And that's always nice because Saturday is my birthday.
Oh.
And yes.
Happy
and I
early
always
birthday.
like it. Thank you. I always like it when I get a warm day right around the time of my birthday. Both my parents have passed. And so I always like to say that my dad gets me one warm day in February because he had a February birthday too. And my mom always finds me an amazing dress on sale.
Nice.
And every year, that has happened every year for like 10 years. So I think today was my super warm day.
Nice. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. So other than that, we're expecting snow tomorrow, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's about the same here. We're probably in the same path. So yeah, we're gonna get... It's supposed to freeze tonight, and then we're gonna get like 10 inches here anyway. It's just super fun.
Are you in Portland? Where are you in Maine exactly?
I'm in Waldoboro, so I'm like north and a little bit inland. But I'm like half an hour from the coast. So I usually get a little bit more here than we do if you're, right on the ocean. But at least we're getting some winter weather now. That's the nice thing. We're selling snowshoes at the store finally and all that good stuff.
My sister snowshoes, so I think she's tuned in right now.
Nice.
So she probably is going, yay, snowshoes.
Yeah.
She does love to snowshoe. She lives in upstate New York, so.
Oh, nice. Perfect. That's a great place to go snowshoeing.
Yep, right in the Adirondacks.
Yeah.
Nice.
I actually
Very beautiful up there.
I have family in upstate New York too. So that's beautiful place to be. So I already lost my place and I'm at the beginning of my notes, but I would like if you wouldn't mind for those in the audience who might not be familiar with your work, although I'm pretty sure all of them know who you are. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes. I have been writing since the age of 5. My very first little short story, which my dad kept and I still have somewhere, was about a suicidal tree. Yeah, so I think he probably knew at that young age that his hands were going to be kind of full. My first job when I was 16, I was a reporter for our local newspaper. I shared that job with another guy in the school. His name was Adam. He may or may not be on tonight. Then I went on and I became an obituary and a features writer at Gannett Suburban Newspapers after college, where I worked on the newspaper there. Then I went into public relations and marketing. Then I decided I'd always been a fiction writer and that's what I wanted to be. So right now I've had over 100 stories in magazines and anthologies. I have a collection out called The Shadows Behind, which is my latest collection of stuff. I also have one called Tales from Haunted Disney World, Skeletons in the Swimming Hole. That's a much older book, but that is still out there.
Nice.
I got a BA from Burlington College and an MFA from Goddard, both in writing. I am the editor of a dark literary fiction magazine called 34 Orchard, which is entering its 3rd year now already. It seems like yesterday.
Congratulations. That's so awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how I'm keeping it together, but we are. I have edited a couple of anthologies. I occasionally co-host the Dark Discussions film podcast, although I've been so busy lately. The last 2 years, I've just been writing a lot, and I really haven't had time for that. And I'm the co-chair of the Horror Writers Association's Connecticut chapter. I have a background in community theater, both on stage and off. I was an aquarium volunteer, both in husbandry and in the education areas. And I read tarot cards. So that's a little bit about me.
Sweet. Very multifaceted. Lots and lots of talents.
Thank you. Screaming Aquarius, you know. We are jacks of all trades and mistresses of none. Is pretty much what it is. But yeah, my real love and passion is fiction. Short fiction in particular. And so I think that's, once I settled that that's what I wanted to do, I kind of put all my eggs there, and I've been very happy ever since.
Awesome. So. Very cool. Well, today our topic is about character-driven horror. Characters are the lifeblood of books. We follow in their footsteps willingly page after page, no matter how dreadful their paths may be. First of all, I'd like to talk about creating compelling and likable characters. What do you think is the way to make readers want to follow along with a horror novel's main character?
Well, I think that that's a really interesting question, because as writers, we're always told, right, like from day one, it's always like, oh, your characters have to be likable and people have to like them and blah, blah, blah. And I always thought that phrase was sort of interesting, because I have actually fallen in love with some pretty awful characters in my stories, in the work of others, and honestly, even in real life. And so it always amused me that people use this phrase a lot, likable, and I almost think there should be a rephrasing of that. I'm not so sure that it's as much likable as it is relatable or identifiable. We need to feel something for a character, and just like when you meet someone on a train or a bus or a car, you know, you're like, oh my god, I met this guy and we talked about how much he likes Jeopardy or snowshoeing or whatever it is. And I think that's what we are really all looking for. We just want to have that connection. So I think in fiction, you can get away with having characters that are not as warm and fuzzy. I think you can have characters that are kind of cold. You know, and of course, characters are flawed just like people. And characters can have some pretty awful faults. But I think the secret is really tapping into that connection. And you're not going to necessarily hit every reader. You know, like some readers are going to be like, oh my God, I hate this character because this character does this particular thing or believes this particular thing. And so I therefore do not like this character. Well, there's nothing you can do about that. But that same character might meet a reader might meet that same character and go, oh, holy cow, I know exactly how this person feels. Or I've done that. Or, oh man, yeah, I mean, I don't wear anything but clogs either. Like, I don't care if this character goes and kills 6 chickens because they wear the same kind of clogs I do. And so I think it's almost, instead of making them likable, you make them more relatable to more people. Because if a person can identify and connect, they're going to forgive an awful lot of things. Right? It's like a bad boyfriend or lover or whatever. You meet the guy and it's like all great, and like you sort of forgive a lot of faults, you know, because you're like, oh, okay, well, that guy's a slob, but he's great in bed. Or, oh, that guy had an ex and she's, you know, whatever, like she killed his cat or whatever it is. And, you know, and I don't know, but you know what? We have such a good chemistry. I really connect with him. A great example of this, actually, I did want to talk about this, is if anybody has read the book You or seen the series on Netflix. I gave that a try because somebody recommended it to me and said, this is up your alley. The guy's a stalker initially. He eventually becomes a murderer. We find out what he's really about. His social behavior is a little awkward, and something isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
But he's genuinely polite.
Yep.
He's genuinely kind. He's especially good to women. Mm-hmm. And it's not like in a fake or a creepy way. It's like he just treats them well.
Yep.
Like they would want to be treated. He listens to them. He comes across as being charming and warm and romantic and just a decent person.
Yep.
And the reason in the first season and in the first few chapters of the novel itself, he explains that the reason that he is stalking this one particular woman is simply because he's really fallen head over heels in love with her, and he really thinks she's the one. Okay, right there, I'm like, oh my God, I get it. Mm-hmm. Like, haven't we all met someone and gone, that's the one, he or she belongs to me, or we belong together.
Yeah.
So right there, you understand that fairy tale type of idealism, and so suddenly it turns his stalking into something that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
You're like, no, but this is different, and he's not doing anything harmful. He's not like a peeping Tom. He's just kind of setting himself up in places so that he'll be where she is.
Yeah.
You can rationalize it. And then this guy will just go out and murder somebody and cut his head off and stick it in a bag, and you're like, oh.
Yep.
Yeah, but you know what? That guy was nasty, so whatever. You kind of write it off. And this is a character that shouldn't be likable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he befriends this little boy, and the little boy's mom's boyfriend is beating him. Well, Joe's had enough, so one day, Joe does something to the kid. I forget, he drops him off at his friend's house or something, and he goes and he kills his boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting there cheering, going, yay!
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute!
Yeah.
So I really think a case could be made for, as long as you have something in there that your reader or your viewer can empathize or sympathize with. Mm-hmm. I don't think the character necessarily has to be likable.
Sure. And I actually had not thought of this example until you mentioned You, but Dexter Morgan of Dexter fame is another really good example of a character who, should be really hard to like because he is a serial killer, but you can't help but fall in love with him because you can identify with his upbringing, his sort of not being connected to other people, and his not understanding how to be connected to other people. But also his relationships with his sister and his father are relatable. So he's a good example too.
I had thought about Dexter also. And I think too, as long as there's flaws, like you just said with Dexter, we all have flaws.
Yes.
Everybody's got flaws. Everybody is a bag of paradoxes,
yep.
And, even, I don't know, look at Carrie, it's Stephen King's Carrie. Mm-hmm. She's not, and Dolores Claiborne, same thing, not the most likable women, yep. really, either one of them. But we feel for Carrie because she's being bullied.
Yep. Yeah.
And we feel for Dolores Claiborne because she's been abused.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, let's face it, especially Dolores Claiborne, you end up respecting her because she's tough and she's been through this horrible life and she did what she had to do. But she's not necessarily likable.
Yeah.
She's a nasty old cuss, really. But you end up liking her because you get it. You're like, oh my gosh, but if I had been abused, I'd probably be like that too.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting about this conversation is that I had put at a later point in our talk to go over creating an unlikable protagonist, and whether or not that is a harder whether or not that's actually harder craft wise to do, versus creating somebody that's, a little more approachable like that. Like, say, the father in Pet Sematary is just kind of like, dad, starting a new chapter in a new house, or like Chief Brody in Jaws, who's just a guy who doesn't like the water, who's living on an island. So, in your opinion, do you think it is harder to write a character that is not exactly likable, or not exactly, let's see, I don't want to say likable. I want to say, is it harder to create a character that is not as approachable for readers, and then sort of make them want to follow this character's story?
I think it's more difficult to make somebody that isn't as approachable.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that's much harder. I think villains, a real villain, is actually much more difficult to create. Simply because you have to kind of work harder to think about, how can I make this person detestable in a way? I mean, we're jumping ahead here to villains instead of just unlikable protagonists.
Yes.
So maybe I'll back off on the villains right now. We'll go back to that. But the unlikable protagonist, I think, is harder to create, because you really have to stop and think about what would make somebody really not like this person. Like, I think a good example is bullying. But how many stereotypes can you do with that? Like, there's a bully stereotype, there's an abuser stereotype, there's and I think those are definitely stereotypes. And so how do you create an unlikable protagonist that's not a stereotype so that people can still relate to him?
Yep.
Did I answer that question?
Yes.
Right. I feel like I'm kind of spinning here because I did not give that any thought.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
I think it is a lot harder. It's harder for me to really detest a character, to make somebody unlikable. Although I did write a novella called This Poisoned Ground, and there was a character in there, her name was Erica, and boy, a lot of people wrote to me and said, dude, I just did not like her. I mean, she's only in one scene.
Okay.
But people were
that's
like,
all you needed.
Instantly, I did not like her. And, maybe it was just the way I envisioned her. But when you read that scene, it's not like I made her deliberately nasty. Like, I didn't do it deliberately. She was just kind of being a little snippy and being snotty and not really understanding where the other character was coming from.
Yep.
And maybe it was just her snippy responses that made everybody be like, you know what, she's not cool. Like, I just really don't like her. So maybe it's more of a question of behavior. Yep. Maybe you have to focus more on the behavior. If somebody's behaving inappropriately or badly, well, maybe that's where you could do that more easily.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you did is you created a really good main character that people were really following, and then you gave them somebody that didn't understand that character and was not nice to them necessarily, and so they were defending your character that they liked. And that's part of it too, is like you have people sort of rooting for your main character, and the minute that somebody shows up that's just like not jiving with that character, you've instantly got everybody's going to rally around your person and be like, knock it off, go away, leave her alone, it's not fair.
All right, I definitely have to write that down because I'm supposed to be working on a sequel to this Poison Ground this year.
Oh, okay.
And one of the issues I was facing was, how do I make this one character really not likable without doing a stereotypical thing and without being, brutally, like, I don't know, like making her really shallow.
Sure.
So that gives me an idea. So I'm glad I'll have to, I have a pen here right now, but I'm just into our conversation. So I'll just go back and type this out because I think that's the last obstacle I need to remove. That's interesting.
I had the pleasure of reading, I think it's an early copy of Brigid Gates Press's new anthology that just came out, which is the I think it's like Gothic. God, I wrote it down and now it's somewhere deep in my notes. A Quaint and Curious volume of Gothic tales. And,
oh, right. I've seen the ads for that, like on Facebook.
And so I got to read it early and give a blurb for their paperback, and there was a story in there that relates to this conversation that's called Down with the Holly Ivy All by Jessica Levai. I'm going to say her name wrong, I apologize. And her protagonist is this money-hungry nephew who's going to his aunt's house for, like, after Christmas time, with the assumption that the aunt is ill, and he's the only family member left, so he's going to inherit. And you're instantly like, you hate him. You instantly hate him because you know that that's all he cares about. And you introduce the aunt, who is this very sweet, like, jovial, wonderful little old lady. And you're invested at that point. You're like, all right, we know it's a short story, first of all. So how is this gonna end? And I think that concept was good too, because even though the main character is the nephew, you do still have a likable secondary character for him to play against. And it was well done. It was a good story. So, just as another thing to throw in there.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll have to definitely write that down, and I gotta make a note to get that book. I have, like, piles of books I still have to, like, get and read, and, stacks of books.
Yes.
That's what writers do.
Yes, God.
I'm gonna buy this, even though it's gonna take me 3 years until I have time to read it.
Yeah, no, that's, it's a sad reality. There's so many. God, there's so many. Yeah, and I'm such a slow reader too. I don't know about you, but I
tend to be very slow, and it's why I rarely read novels anymore.
Yeah.
I read short fiction. Well, I've always been a short fiction junkie because my dad was an English teacher.
Huh.
So when I was little, like really little, he would come home and read me stories out of his textbooks, short stories. So I think I heard, like, The Monkey's Paw when I was, like, 4. I mean, I was way beyond, like, Leningen versus the Ants when I was, like, tiny. Like, these things that were, like, high school reading levels or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was cool because I really got hooked on the short story.
Nice.
And so I'm not surprised that short stories kind of became my thing. Like, and I don't know if it's just creative ADD or whatever, but when I'm writing, and I'm sure you do this too, I go into a place and I stay there.
Yep.
And I really don't mentally come out. Like, everything goes to hell. Like, my checkbook, the taxes, the cleaning, whatever it is, it all goes to hell until this thing is done. Until it's out of my body. I'm the same way with reading.
Yeah.
So if you give me a novel, and it's really good... there was a novel I read last year called A Fall of Marigolds.
Hmm.
I started reading it on my Kindle before it even arrived, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm sucked in. I have to get this. So I ordered it. It came overnight. I think it came in on a Thursday. Saturday at noon, I was done.
Wow.
I did, and I mean, I have a day job. I go to work,
Yeah.
But every second I wasn't doing something else, I was reading.
Yeah.
But then again, like I said, my whole life went to hell. I mean, unless they
Yeah.
asked me to do something at work, I did nothing but read this book.
Yeah.
And I think it's not, maybe for you it's the same. It's not so much being a slow reader. It's that when I read a book, I had a friend a long, long time ago who was dyslexic and really struggled. And this was back in the time before there were a lot of things like audiobooks and things. I mean, they were around, but they were hard to get.
Yep.
And he used to tell me he loved to read and he was a really smart guy, but he just struggled. And he used to tell me, I take a long time to read, not because I have dyslexia, but because when I'm reading a book that's so darn good, I really slow down. Because if I love it that much, I'm going to be so depressed when it's over. It's like I form a relationship with it, and now we're done, and it's over. And now it's going to take me a long time to find another book that I'm going to. And that's what he compared it to. He literally compared it to dating. Like, I was like, and I just thought that was interesting, and that stuck with me because to this day, I think about that comment. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of right. So that's why I like short stories, because I can have that relationship with that short story, but it's brief.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very brief.
Yeah. I love reading novels, but it does just take me a long time. And certain books it takes me a little bit longer with, than others, but the last one that I finished, which I purposefully slowed down so that I could just digest the beautiful writing that it had in it, and that was Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. And I wish I could read that again and experience it again brand new, because it was so good. And it just, God, like,
I know, I have books like that, like, and I read some creative nonfiction too. Like, I felt that same way that you felt about Come With Me.
Yeah.
Is that what it?
Yes.
Yeah. About, like, there's one called Birding with Borders, like, with Birding Without Borders, and it's creative nonfiction, but I love birding and bird watching, and it was about this guy, and his dad was dying of cancer, and how he was going to go all over the world and do what's called the big year, which is where you see as many birds as you can, but he was going to do it globally instead of in one country. And oh my God, the thrill of reading that book. And that's the problem too, when you fall in love with something like that, you read it for the first time and you can never get that back, right? It's like that virgin experience is gone forever. It's like your first passionate kiss. You will never have a kiss that good ever again. Like, I mean, you'll have other good kisses. Yeah. But you won't have that kiss again. Yeah. And I think that's kind of why short stories are fun too, because I think for me, it's easier for me to find that second passionate kiss with a short story than it is for a novel, I think. Or a big long work, but a longer work.
I do like to read short stories. I feel like I'm a little more discerning about my short stories. I notice more stuff in them, so it's not as enjoyable for me. I start getting like kind of, oh, that ending wasn't satisfying enough, like I start just picking things apart, but that's because I have that very analytical, like, can't stop it. But anyway, I feel like I've gotten us off track here, so I do want to come back to the conversation of compelling characters with the drive, and that is, how does character-driven horror differ from plot-driven horror? And what is it about character-driven horror that really fascinates you in particular?
Yeah, I actually end up writing a lot of character-driven horror. I think this is a really difficult topic to talk about because there are so many different ways of interpreting it. But plot-driven is when external conflict is the engine, right? So things happen to the character and then the character reacts. We don't necessarily know a lot of backstory about each character, but we do know, some things. Like, okay, think about the Blair Witch Project, right? The Ring, the original Black Christmas, Jaws, Troll Hunter. In terms of film, I'm not talking books. But film, we get pieces of these characters' pasts. And in some cases, those pieces of their past will play a role in how the plot spins out. But that is not the focus.
Yes.
Character-driven is where internal conflict is the engine, right? And the character's arc is actually the main focus of the story. So one professor told me once, it's like you have to think of it as a character study against the backdrop of horror or against the backdrop of sci-fi, right? He said, so basically your character-driven narrative is character conflict crisis change, or it's character conflict crisis stasis, right? Because the character's either going to grow and change or they're not. And there are some stories or movies where the character does not change. It's a static character. He goes through this arc, but he's not really, then it wouldn't really be static, because the static character is more like hanging out the same the whole thing. But the character's being challenged, he faces this conflict, he's in crisis, and he goes, oh, you know what? No, I'm not going to accept this. I'm just going to stay the way I am. It's almost like a conscious choice. And I think maybe a way to do this, okay, here's a good example of a character conflict crisis stasis, right? I like to think of the Wicker Man in that instance. Now, some people would say that the Wicker Man is a plot-driven film. I'm talking about the original 1970, what is it, 3 or 2?
Something
I think it's
like that, yeah.
I even have it on a T-shirt, like a Summer Isle, like tourism T-shirt from and it says 1972. But I really, truly think that honestly is character. It's character-driven, because the center of that story is not what's happening on that island. That story is about this guy's internal conflict with his religious beliefs when they are challenged too many times. And in the end, despite what he finds and the horrifying truth and all of that, what is he doing as he's burning to death? He is trying to sing Christian hymns at the top of his lungs. So even after everything that he has seen, to challenge his own religious beliefs, and it's very clear that there is a whole other religious system that these people believe that may be real, because he's seen so much creepy stuff, he is still sitting there going, nope, Christianity's the way. Right? So that is an example of a character that doesn't actually change. But some other character-driven, writings and films. I mean, The Haunting of Hill House, right? A lot of Shirley Jackson's character-driven. A lot of Edgar Allan Poe is character-driven. In general, like the whole person going mad thing. That notes just fell. Are character-driven, because I didn't want to forget anything, so I made some notes. Carrie, Dolores Claiborne, Interview with a Vampire, The Shining, all of these, The Other Side of the Door. I just rewatched that today. That's a great one. That, if no one's seen that, I'm not going to give out spoilers, but that's a woman whose son has died. And it really is about her grief and the mistakes that she makes trying to come out of her grief. The Babadook is another one. So I always tend to think of character-driven as being, okay, we're telling the main story is this character's growth or refusal to go.
Yeah.
To grow. The supernatural element or the monster or the whatever it is,
yeah,
that's just the set. You know, that's just the step. What we're really talking about is this woman healing from grief.
Yeah.
Or the Babadook. That's another one, I think, if I didn't already mention that. Let the Right One In, the orphanage. Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of them.
Yeah.
Black Swan.
Black Swan's a great one.
Character. Oh, my God. Yeah. There's a movie that came out in 2020 called Swallow. That's amazing. It's about this woman who has pica. Dude, it is really... Like, she's swallowing tacks and stuff.
Isn't it Jennifer Lawrence that is in that?
Yeah, it's
I remember the trailer for that. It was pretty, pretty unnerving.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I read about that. That was pretty horrifying. And Lights Out is actually another one. Lights Out, you know, people are always like, oh, it's plot driven, but it's kind of not, because it's actually the story of this girl trying to overcome the damage caused by her mother's mental illness that was inflicted on her.
Okay.
Trying to get her brother back, trying to become a good person. At the beginning of the movie, she is an angry, bitter, nasty person. And through this journey with this supernatural creature, she becomes a better person. You know, one of the big points in the film is the meetup with the potential, you know, child care person, the foster person who needs to approve her. That is a big scene. And so I really think it's less about the monster.
Yeah.
And more about her. But then, you know, you get your plot-driven short stories and movies, and I do have a list of character-driven short stories too. I can recommend for our viewers if they would like to, you know, check those out. But I think most good plot-driven films too have character arcs underneath them.
Yep.
Right. The Twister. I mean, I know that's not horror, but look at Twister. Right. There's two things going on in Twister. The two main stories. There's the plot-driven tornado stuff. But then it's all about Jo trying to accept her father's death and to try to heal her relationship with her ex-husband. Or he's trying to heal it with her. But that's two major things. And one of them is actually character-driven. The other one's plot-driven. So I always find that movie really interesting. Because it's a lot.
That's it. I was actually going to get to the idea of having something that is that, like, both plot-driven and character-driven. I find that The Walking Dead is one of those television shows that really balances that plot-driven and character-driven storytelling very well. And not just the television show, but also the original graphic novels. And there is a video game that Telltale made that enhances that character-driven story even more by giving the player control of decisions, and those decisions that you make affect the outcome of all the other characters while you're playing. So you're basically choosing who lives, who dies, you know, what your decision making has passed on to this, you know, little girl that you're trying to save, and how she grows up over the course of the games is affected by those choices that you're making. And it's really so well done. It's just very well layered.
Yeah, and I think too we're seeing a time now where, probably because of the rise of social media, where personal stories are becoming more important in things like advertising and marketing, and, you know, the whole keyed very specifically to the individual. I think we are seeing more blends. You know, we are seeing more where it's plot driven and it's character driven, and it becomes sort of murky. However, I've always believed that a good character can save a really crappy plot, but like a crappy character cannot save a bad plot.
Yeah.
Like you can't. Like if the plot's bad,
yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Did I say that right? No. A crappy character
Cannot.
It's a good
good character cannot save
a terrible plot cannot be saved by a terrible plot can be saved by a great character. A terrible character cannot be saved by a good plot. That's what it is. Yeah. I didn't write that down, so.
That's okay. That's one of those hard ones to get out there.
But yeah, there's a lot of character-driven, like, short stories, too, just individually. There's The Yellow Wallpaper, of course, by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. There's Light of Other Days by Bob Shaw. That's science fiction. That's a beautiful short story, if you can find that. That's character-driven. Contents of the Dead Man's Pockets by Jack Finney. Dead Letters. That one's hard to find. That's an excellent. That is a really good. It's called Dead Letters. It's by Mario Milosevic.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to find, but I think it might be out there. But if you want to read it, it's super short. It's about this guy whose job he gets paid to write letters. Like if my husband died, I could go to this agency and say, I want you to send me a letter from my dead husband, or
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? Like or whatever. And this guy, that's what he does. He writes letters to widows from their dead husbands.
Okay.
Because the dead husband's paid for it and said, I want to make sure that you remember her birthday and everything. And he just freaks out because this one woman's like, I don't want this. I hated his guts.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear from him ever again. I'm glad he's dead. And the guy's just like, oh. Well, like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
But it's about his own struggle with his own loss. And so it's a really good story. But yeah, anyway.
That reminds me of a Black Mirror episode. Have you seen Black Mirror?
I have not, and everybody's been saying me, I really need to check it out. I just haven't had a minute, you know?
Sure,
I just finished Afterlife on Netflix. I'm in the middle of Archive 81.
God, so good.
I know, I really love it. It's like crack.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm a huge found footage fan, so that also makes it fun for me. But yeah, Black Mirror has always been on my list. I have not had a chance to try it out yet, but I will. You know, eventually, sometimes it's years later, I do get around to these things.
Yeah. And that's, as an anthology series, it's a really fun take on, like, the dark side of technology. But there is a story, I think it's in the first season, that does kind of remind me of that short story that you were talking about. And I want to say that short story is old too. I think it was published in I don't know. It was either, this is going to sound really ridiculous, I think it's the 90s. I think it was like the late 90s or late 90s. I want to say 97 or something maybe. Okay.
I don't know, but I have a copy of it, so if you ever want to read it, let me know and I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
I did have a copy. I do have a copy of it, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's one of my favorite short stories of all time. I love it.
Nice.
Yeah, and I also think, too, one of the interesting things about character-driven horror is that in character-driven story, the protagonist tends to react to things kind of based on their own vulnerability or weakness.
Yeah.
Which creates a different sort of a story than plot-driven, where the character's reacting to things happening to them, but the weakness is not necessarily the focal point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Because character-driven is about growth or lack of growth.
Yep.
You know? I don't know. I kind of like the half and half, though. That I think some of my fiction is half and half. It's not all character-driven.
Well, I think that's a really neat balance to be able to do both. Because it's just, I think it's a little more fun to be able to do both, honestly. Though I also love writing character-driven fiction, so it's neat that we're seeing more of it come out that's a fusion versus just one or the other. And just as a note, I didn't realize that we're already coming up on our hour time, which seems crazy, but we've been having such a good time talking, so I want to make sure that we do get to talking about villains, because we started talking about them a little earlier, and I think now is probably a good time to mention how writing villains really can be a difficult part of writing character-driven fiction, especially if you are writing your villains as your main characters. Which some books, don't reveal that until the very end. Some, it's obvious to begin with, but what is your take on writing the villain in a character-driven story?
Well, I think for me in character-driven horror, the villain has to usually represent or is a stand-in for what it is the protagonist needs to fight or conquer in order to grow and change. And that's the big difference. I think in plot-driven, you get many villains that cause problems, right? Like Die Hard. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, just villains causing problems left mm-hmm. and right. But I think in a character-driven story, what's always kind of fascinated me is that the villain sometimes is not always clear-cut. Mm-hmm. The villain is almost like a catalyst sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? Like you get the ghost, and I'm trying to think of a movie where that would be like a good example, just off the top of my head. But like the ghost is usually, or the spiritual presence is sort of the catalyst for that character to change or embrace something. The other
Peak.
Side of the Door would be a good one, I guess.
Yeah, or Crimson Peak, maybe.
Crimson Peak,
yeah.
Yes. Where it's a catalyst for that character to kind of grow and change, or grow and fail to change.
Yeah.
And I also think that sometimes in a character-driven narrative, the villain is a side of the self, right? I mean, if you look at The Telltale Heart, mm-hmm. I mean, a really early example, but who's the villain there? The villain is the narrator himself.
Yep.
The cops are not the villain, the cops that come in, right? The old man who died is not the villain, even though he's trying to convince you that the old man was actually the villain.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a justification for his own messed up behavior, is what that is. We actually don't know if this old man was really as bad as this guy says. But the beating of the heart is his own guilt.
Yep.
That's what that represents. So in essence, the villain in that story is himself. It's his guilty conscience. And I think that's what makes villains in character-driven stories so much more interesting. Because it's almost never the monster. Mm-hmm. The monster is like more the catalyst, or not even the catalyst. There's another word I'm thinking of where it's like the spark. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like the inciting incident.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, I remember. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, the monster or the ghost or whatever it is it's the inciting incident that gets this ball rolling.
Yeah. I had mentioned in my notes the Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, being a really good portrayal of these guys who are seemingly they just were trying to do something good for their tribe, and they ended up causing this massacre. and they really don't have much shame over it. One guy sort of feels a little bit, but it doesn't really matter, because this entity is, coming back for revenge on them for what they did. And so it's kind of there's two bad guys almost, but you feel bad for the deer spirit and you also feel bad for these guys too at the same time, but they're both villains. So it's a really, really well told story. And it, of course, won all those awards and, and stuff.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
that's a clue right there that it was really, really good.
Yeah, it's definitely a well done story about villains. If you guys have not read it, it's definitely worth reading.
And, the version of The Invisible Man that came out with Elizabeth Moss.
Yep.
Back in early 2020. And I only remember when it was because it was the last movie I saw in a theater. But, that's an interesting concept for a villain in a character-driven film as well, because that story is really about her trying to escape her scary narcissist boyfriend. Mm-hmm. But when the movie opens, she is kind of weak and battered and can't stand on her own 2 feet. And even though he's the villain, his continued, trying to find her and blah, blah, mm-hmm. And pursue her and all of this horrible stuff that he does to her is the thing that makes her change.
Yeah.
And become strong.
Yep.
So that in the end, she's actually the one who kicks his ass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, but that's an example of a villain. Again, the real villain in that story is herself, because mm-hmm. she has to learn how to grow in order to beat the monster. So you almost have 2 villains sometimes in a character-driven mm-hmm. thing. Whereas plot-driven, it always feels like, well, the villain is like, oh, dude, we have to go and get the knife and slay the monster. I mean, it's always that type of thing.
Yeah.
Or we need to get everybody off the island before this volcano blows up. Like, it's pretty, like, external. And that's why I think villains in character-driven are just so much more interesting, because mm-hmm. you're never quite sure who the villain actually is.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Yeah.
You have to really stop and think, now, who is the actual villain here?
Yeah. I will mention another book. I'm not going to get too into it because I really don't want to give away. But it's called Here There Are Monsters, and it's I would call it a young adult horror by Amalinda Berube.
Okay.
And that's worth reading. So it's just for that really well done villain, it is worth reading.
All right, I'll have to check into that. Yeah, because I do a lot of character-driven fiction, I don't really think about my villains too much. They just kind of are there, and I go with it. I don't really give it a lot of thought. But yeah, maybe I don't know. I think sometimes writing gets so instinctual for me mm-hmm. that I actually have to just stop and think about the pieces of it sometimes. Mm-hmm. Which is why I love doing, like, giving interviews and just talking with other writers like this at cons or on Facebook or whatever, just Zooming, because it kind of gets me thinking in that more technical mode that I mm-hmm. think a lot of us ignore.
Yeah.
When you're deep into that, dude, you're not thinking about that.
No.
Like, I'm writing a love scene or something. I'm not like, wait, what's the inciting incident? No.
Yeah.
To those of you out there watching, no, we don't actually plan that crap. No. That is stuff we fix later if it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Even if we plot, even if we're very anal about plotting, because mm-hmm. some of us are plotters and some of us are pantsers, if you're actually writing and really deep into it, you're usually not stopping in the middle to think about technical things like how stereotypical is my villain or whatever it is. That's stuff that you do later.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So true. So true. All right, we're in our wrap-up segment here. So there is a section where I do ask if you want to name any character-driven horror films, books, TV shows, video games, anything like that you haven't already listed that you think people might want to check out.
I think I pretty much said everything throughout, but there is one that I definitely missed commenting on that I love. And if you really want a really interesting, character-driven disaster movie, then these final hours out of Australia is it. That movie is amazing.
Wow.
It is very intense, though. It's very intense. And I mean, you're going to want to put a gun to your head. It is depressing.
Ooh. Okay.
But it is wonderful. It is probably one of the best disaster movies I've ever seen, because it's not really a disaster film. It's really about, this one guy who needs to come to peace with himself. Again, the end of the world is the inciting incident and the, quote, villain, but the real villain is himself. And he goes on this journey trying to heal himself when the world only has 24 hours left.
Okay.
It's really pretty good. And the other one I wanted to mention, and then it just went out of my head, so I guess I won't mention it.
Well, that's all right. I will give you, like, if at any point you do remember what it is in the next few moments, definitely feel free to say it, because I will try to make a list when I post this on YouTube.
The Wave. Out of Norway. The Wave Out of Norway. That is subtitled. But it's excellent because that is a combo. That's one of those combo ones that we were talking about, where it is plot driven, but it is also character driven.
Cool.
Definitely. It's definitely both things. It's like Twister. They're sort of neck and neck.
Okay.
Yeah. That was what it was. I was like, wait, I forgot about The Wave, because that's a good combo, because we were talking about combos. Yeah. And I'm like, that's a good combo one. Because sometimes I think it's easier to read or watch things to try to get an idea of what this is, instead of trying to get tangled up in all these languages and definitions and, stuff like that. Sometimes you just go, oh, Yeah. Okay, that's character driven? Well, now I know. Yeah. And it's easier for me to identify,
Yep. I will also include, we had talked about a few things, but I will also include, in terms, for those of you who do like video games, who play them, the Cat Lady is probably one of the best character-driven indie video games out there. It is available through Steam. You play as a middle-aged woman who just has her cats, and she actually tries to commit suicide, I think. So there is some, there's definitely some dark themes going, but in that she makes a pact with death to live again, but in doing so has to defeat these parasites, which are these people who are corrupt, sort of taking over the world. And it's a really, really well done character study, because she has to sort of learn how to live again and how to love again. And but anyway, for those of you who would like to check that out, check it out. I will ask my wrap-up questions now, which are, do you have a favorite subgenre of character-driven horror that you like in particular?
Yes, ghost stories are my favorite.
Nice. Yeah,
ghost stories, and I don't even know what to call this, because it's not really a subgenre, but the childhood trauma.
Yep.
So the ghost stories, or like the person is really struggling with their childhood trauma, and I know that. So my favorites are ghost stories where the character arc is about moving on from childhood trauma.
Gotcha.
That's really because childhood trauma is not a subgenre, but yeah.
The coming of age stuff.
Footage, but you rarely have found footage that's character driven. But I think that day is coming.
Yeah.
I do think that day is eventually going to show up.
Archive, I would say Archive 81 is pretty character driven.
Yeah, I would say
for
so.
Found footage. that's definitely a good one. Yeah, I definitely did write coming of age down as a type of character driven horror, psychological. Um, it's also really good too. What and I think I may have already asked you this question earlier, but everything is so out of order. What in particular do you enjoy about writing character driven horror? Is there something in particular that you really like doing when you're creating your characters?
I really love getting to create scenarios that I wouldn't normally get to live through in my real life. I love to think of myself as different. How would my life have been different? How would I have done that? But I think the thing that fascinates me most about writing character driven horror is that it forces me to look at myself and look at behavior patterns in real people and understand how real people do things.
Mm-hmm.
And I learn a lot about myself, and I learn a lot about the behavior of others when I write character driven horror. I learn a lot about damage. I learn a lot about the effects of trauma. I learn about, oh my God, I read so many psychology things. Like, I love reading psychology. I love reading about how the brain works and personality types and how they work together. I mean, just all of that. That is really my favorite part of writing it, character-driven horror, because I really feel like the sky is the limit. I feel like plot-driven, you can kind of get stuck sometimes in, like, a certain formula or, you know, the hero's journey or the map or the, you know, whatever. You know, there's all these different things. But I almost feel like character-driven horror is so freeing because you can kind of do whatever you want. Like, if you want to write about a person who is terrified of nail clippers because, you know, their mother left them as a baby in a nail salon and they were showered with people's dirty nails. I mean, oh my God, what you could do with that. Like, you know what I mean? There's so much you can do.
Yeah.
But with plot, you kind of have to, with plot-driven, there's got to be certain definite points along the way.
Yeah.
But character-driven horror is fun because you can do free flow. You can do, you know, you can have only two characters, or you can just have one character, or your character can be anybody. But plot-driven is different. Plot-driven, you have to have certain things happen, and I just think it's much more liberating to do character-driven. You can also kind of work out your own demons when you write character-driven fiction, because you can say stuff through your characters that you may not feel free to say in your life. You know, or that you're afraid to express, or you're too hurt to express. It can be I think character-driven fiction is cathartic, as opposed to plot-driven, which kind of really isn't. I guess maybe that's my best answer.
Yeah.
Wow, that was like really long and involved.
No, that was
like one word. But...
I really vibe with that. I get that. I would agree totally. So where can we find more information about you? Website or what social media are you on?
Okay, so I have a website. It is KristiPetersенSchoonover.com. Don't worry about spelling. If you just type some semblance of those three words, I am the only one right now in the entire world. My name is horrible, but I am also the only one.
Well, I realize I've been saying Schoonover this entire time, and I feel terrible. You know, I am so sorry.
It doesn't matter, dude. It's really fine. Schoonover, don't call me late for cocktail hour.
I feel totally like I'm back in trying to pronounce John's last name again. That was an issue on an earlier video.
Pronunciations are hard, you know. They're never easy. And also I am on Facebook, and again, you can just do Kristi Petersen Schoonover. I don't have an author page. I just will accept your friend request if I see that you're a reader or, whatever. I do that because I like to feel like I can get to know my readers a little bit and they can get to know me as a human being, rather than just, like posting on an author page with separate content. I just felt like, I'd rather just let people just see whatever. Like, I don't care if they see what I'm eating for dinner or that here's my cat, like whatever. I don't care. And I'm also on Twitter, but honestly, I don't really do much with Twitter, but I am KP Schoonover over there. But on Twitter, mostly what I do is I'm kind of shameful, but I just keep it as an archive of links of things I would like to find on the internet. So if I find something in a website that's like for a story idea, I'll be like, ooh, I'm going to put that out on my Twitter. And then, believe it or not, like years later, I can be like, oh yeah, that article. Oh, okay. Well, I put it on my Twitter. So all I got to do is go through my Twitter and search and it'll be there. So I don't do much on Twitter, but I'm really big on Facebook. I like to hang out there. I just feel like I can connect with people and I can see their lives and they can see mine. And I don't know. I just enjoy it. I feel like it's a big, bar where you can just go hang out and whatever, talk to people.
Well, that's basically what it is. And if anybody wants some insight into what Kristi is working on next, you can check out her Twitter. There probably will be some clues in there.
Yes, that is very true. Yeah, I went through a whole big, there's been a lot of interesting stuff I've put up lately. Stuff about volcanoes and abandoned whatever, and then there's Disney stuff, and there's shark stuff, and dinosaur stuff, like whatever. It doesn't make any sense. Whatever I'm interested in, I just throw it up there, because I never know when I'm going to need it.
My ears perked up to the shark stuff. That's like...
Yes! Because you did the Sharkopedia, didn't you? Who did Sharkopedia?
No, that wasn't me. I don't know who that was, but man, oh man.
Did you read it?
I haven't read it. I really want to.
Oh, it's fun.
Oh man, yeah, no,
You really need Sharkopedia.
I do want it. It's
You need to go to Amazon and get Sharkopedia. I don't even remember. I feel so bad. Like, I don't even remember the name of the girl who wrote it, but I loved this one. I loved it.
No, I definitely remember when it came out, because it was all over Horror Oasis, and I was just like, oh, I do need to get this, and but no, I love sharks. Fun fact, I do have a shark tattoo that is hiding here.
Cool.
So I just, like, yeah, they're awesome. Someday I would love to write a shark novel, but we'll see.
You should just go for it, man.
Yeah. After all the other stuff. I
wrote a giant killer mantis shrimp novel. It's a piece of crap. It's laying in my basement. It's never going to go anywhere, but I did it. It's done.
That's awesome.
And it is, like, so bad. Like, I go back and read it now and I go, oh, Jesus, I could never put this up there. I don't even know if I'd give this to people, to be honest.
I mean, as long as you're entertained by it and you think that somebody else would be entertained by it, that's all that matters. Like, I mean, I think it would be fantastic, but
I really need to. Well, you know what? Too, it was like it was only like the second novel I ever tried.
Okay.
Or the third, maybe. And it's got problems. Like, I mean, I tried rereading it, and it was way before, like, my education or anything, and I was like, oh, dear Lord. Like, I would just seriously have to start over and, like, rewrite the whole thing. I don't know. Maybe some summer I'll do it for fun.
So
because I really would like to see that book out there.
This is
called Warlock.
What's funny is we on an earlier episode, Rob and I were talking about stories that we had written when we were younger that we didn't want to see the light of day, and I think it might be fun to do a a series where that is like excerpts from stories that are like kept sort of on the DL.
That would be a great. That is genius.
I think
because we've all got that stuff.
I think that's
and you've all got it, and like you just come on and you say okay, so on this week's episode we're gonna have these two people, and like they're only gonna read like 10 minutes each or 5 minutes each or something.
I think
you know what I mean, just to keep it moving.
I think we might do that.
I think it's genius.
All
right, I'll tell you what. If you decide to do this and you're going to open it up to other people,
oh yeah,
I swear to you, I will read Gorlak from Gorlak. Yes. As bad as it is, I will read from.
No, I definitely want to do this now. That convinced me. Yeah.
And I will not change any of it.
Okay.
Okay, I will read the original.
This is gonna happen. So I will probably set this up as like a mid-season like interlude, because Winterviews ends at the end of March. That's it for season 1. So what I'll probably do is set something up for like summertime maybe, and then that way we can have fun sharing the deep dark trunk stories.
All right, for you, I would do it.
I'm so excited. Oh my god!
And I'll pick the good, like a good part where the shrimp is like really bad.
All right. Oh man. All right. All right. So I have definitely gone way over.
Yeah, we went way over. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's all right. So
what happens when you get two writers that are very excited. Seriously, we could stay here and BS for another 3 hours.
That's fair.
Easily.
That's fair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I will thank everybody in our chat for coming on tonight and being active and chatting a lot and sharing some links in the chat too. That was very nice. I will also say thank you to Kristi for coming on tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. I hope it was useful.
This was a lot of fun. And I will tell the chat to stay tuned for next week's episode, which is actually going to be on Wednesday night, not Thursday night. I had a scheduling conflict. So Wednesday night, February 9th at 8 p.m., we will be discussing small town horror and character-driven horror. Well, no, that's not true. Small town horror and coming-of-age horror with Tom Detty.
Well, fun! I love Tom. All right, I'll come watch Tom talk.
And I will also mention that Tom's book of Men and Monsters was recently chosen for the preliminary ballot of the 2021 Stoker Awards, so that is pretty exciting. So we'll see what happens with the ballots. I'm looking forward to picking his brain. Until then, everybody have a great night, and we will see you then. And then it will take me 5 minutes